So we're sat in Cape Town at the moment, and today is a big day. We're approaching the G20 summit, and we have protests widespread across the entirety of South Africa today based around gender-based violence and countering that. Talk to me a little bit about that. I'm an outsider here. What is the big uproar about gender-based violence specifically in South Africa?
It's something that has been in essence, I would say an epidemic in South Africa for a very long time. And what the government and specifically President Cyril Ramaphosa has been doing since 2018 is pretty much just give it lip service. And now because he's got this platform, he's paying lip service to an international community. Whereas previously, when it is the state of the nation, he would only do it to the South African public. But since he became the president in 2018, every single year, gender-based violence is getting out of control. Every few seconds in South Africa, a woman is in some way, shape or form assaulted or some GBV that is taking place. And if you think about the first summit that he had in 2018 with regards to gender-based violence, it's almost like it's a running joke in South Africa that whenever the ANC needs to get some form of aid or whenever they want to campaign for elections, then they bring this up because it's an easy thing for them to stand on a principle with, but actually they do nothing with. Because from 2018 till 2025, 30 times Cyril Ramaphosa in speeches have mentioned that they need to fight gender-based violence. And that is 7 years, and every single year it is getting worse.
Well, you say they pay lip service to it. That's clearly not working if these protests now today are widespread to demonstrate the impact of women not being involved economically in South Africa.
Yeah.
So is this a big turning point, or is this perhaps more people signaling that they're unhappy but not necessarily doing that much to actually rise up against this lip service that keeps on happening?
I think the protest is perfectly timed. I think it's, to put it into the global space to talk about what's actually happening in South Africa. Because for the longest time, South Africa was just remembered as a rainbow nation, Nelson Mandela, everybody walking into the sunset. But as we've seen over the last few months, especially since Donald Trump became the president, a spotlight has been put on South Africa. And I think this is something that a lot of South Africans have wanted, so that that the truth can be told and that it's not just this fairy tale and everybody is kumbayaing. I believe, though, that, of course, everybody that is participating in these protests, they've got a valid reason. Because as I said, every few seconds in this country, and remember, 1 out of 9 cases are reported. And from the reported cases, it's every few seconds. So let that sink in.
What's the population of South Africa?
64 million, I believe.
So not a huge country.
No.
Every few seconds. And I think I saw somewhere that a woman's murdered every 3 hours in South Africa.
Yeah, I mean, it's ridiculous. If so, murders, it's a murder is of a woman, it's every few hours. But then abuse happens every few minutes. And if you look at perhaps the smaller details of what gender-based violence defines, then it is every few seconds.
Yeah. Well, the big question here, and I want us to really strip this back, is why is this so prevalent in South Africa?
It's a great question, but I mean, I think it forms part of a bigger issue that we have. We've got 84 murders in South Africa. And if you look at the police service that South Africa has, the last time I think they evaluated it was 170,000 police officers that needs to patrol 64 million people in this country. When you break it down, not all 170,000 police officers are on duty. You can split that in half. So then you're roughly 85,000. And let's say 30,000 of that is administrative staff that don't leave the police control room. And then ultimately you have, I believe, 1 police officer for every 800 people in this country. So fundamentally it starts there, where nobody is actually scared of being arrested or facing prosecution because so many people get away with it.
Well, I've seen lots of comments, especially on my first interview here in South Africa with Aaron Struts earlier in the year. They were all saying that they don't bother calling the police anymore.
Yes.
Even if they're being robbed or they have been robbed, they call the private security, where there's money involved and there are better incentives perhaps.
Yeah.
So
But just on that, if I can say that, and it's happened so many times, people only contact or go to the police station to report it so that they can get the number to give to the insurance companies. That is literally the only reason they open a case. And in some instances, when they open a case, they usually get the response, or you'll receive a SMS, which will tell you what your number is, the police number, case number. And sometimes 14 days later, you'll get the case number. Something that should usually be processed on the very same day within a couple of hours. Sometimes you get it, sometimes you don't.
Well, I want us to speak about the policing in South Africa, but just to keep this on the gender-based violence for now, take me back to this question of why it's so prevalent in South Africa. Is this a cultural phenomenon? Is there something that you guys lack that the West has moved on towards? Because we've got these problems too. And actually, it's quite different in the West in the fact that it's actually exaggerated oftentimes there. So it seems like there's a very different thing going on here where people aren't exaggerating. There's a genuine crisis. I mean, Ramaphosa today or yesterday actually declared this a crisis now. And I guess that's because people have been making enough uproar that it would be inconvenient for him not to do so politically. But in the West, it seems like things are getting better in the UK, in the US, and that actually perhaps we've been overcorrecting to the point of oversensitivity. And you've had movements like #MeToo, where now guys my age, I'm 20, we're too scared to approach girls at all for fear of being accused of being a creep or overstepping the mark simply by greeting them nicely and showing our interest romantically. But I don't get the sense that the same thing is going on here. This feels a lot more serious and there's a lot more weight behind this. So iron this out for me. What is the difference between the US, the UK, and South Africa with this issue?
I think, look, if you have to boil it down, we unfortunately, the government is very good at giving us statistics based on ethnicity when it comes to employment, when it comes to various different things. But when it comes to crime, we don't really know what the stats say. But if you look at cultures in South Africa, obviously there is some cultures that see a woman in a lesser way than other cultures.
What do you mean?
For instance, I know in Zulu culture, if you look at Zulu tradition, there's no real leaders or female leaders in the Zulu tradition. So ultimately, whether it's a patriarchal system and we look and when it's broken down and how it's treated, you'll find that is usually the case. But once again, I mean, I'm not an expert on Zulu culture or Xhosa culture, but what I do know is that we have this problem in South Africa. I think also it boils down to people that would tend to be violent don't get the help that they need firstly, and they also don't fear the police. I think that is the big difference here, the lack of policing and the lack of actually when somebody opens a case, they know that something will be done and actually they'll get their day in court. Unfortunately now, they don't even have the protection. So if they go and open the case, like I said, sometimes you even don't get a case number. And then the husband or the boyfriend will find out about this, and then who's going to protect her? So fundamentally, I think the problem culture might play a little bit of an aspect in it, because I'm not too clued up on that. But I do know for certain that it's just the criminals aren't scared of being caught, and they just continue down that path.
I suppose the law there and actually having a robust system, that acts as a deterrence.
Yeah.
But ultimately, I think the criminal scumbags that are going to do these actions would still attempt them. They would go after them even if there is a risk of being caught, just like drug dealers keep on dealing illegal drugs and rapists keep on raping in the UK when the law is very clear. So I really do want to press this point, even though I know you perhaps don't want to speak about the cultures specifically, about Zulus or another culture that I can't pronounce. I'll get cancelled for trying to pronounce it. Xhosa?
Xhosa. Yeah, but you're good. I mean, Xhosa is fine, but
it's good enough.
It's like the click, Xhosa.
But there must be something else going on here if people are lining up, and I've seen many documentaries where women speak about having literally dozens of men lining up to do horrible things to them, and the men taking pride in doing this. And we've had the scandal recently of the grooming gangs in the UK with mainly Pakistani Muslim men. And there's a real question about culture there in the UK and why that has happened in the Midlands, in Bradford, where there are larger demographics of Pakistani Muslim men. Lots of back and forth around that. But it always goes back to culture and a clash of values and an incompatibility, perhaps, of Muslim values with the Western Judeo-Christian values. Now, I don't have any skin in the game in terms of this because I'm not religious, but I find it very interesting sitting from the proverbial fence and observing what is happening in terms of this battle of ideas that's unfolding, where one society is an actual patriarchy and one has liberated women that are free to crush it and do whatever they want, proclaiming that it's a patriarchy with infographics on Instagram. But actually, they're doing pretty well and they're out-earning young men.
Yeah.
So I wonder if there's something there, and perhaps this opens up a greater question of the instability we've seen since apartheid, that there is a fundamental clash here of cultures in South Africa. And everyone is trying to get along the best they can, perhaps in day-to-day life.
Yeah.
But then you go online, you read the news, and it's havoc. Is that maybe more what's going on here?
I think it definitely is the case. I mean, just if you break it down to population groups in South Africa, 85% of this country are Black South Africans. And therefore, when you look at crime statistics, you can analyze based on the population what is actually going on. I fundamentally do think that it is a cultural aspect. It's, like I said, I mean, I'm not too familiar with Zulu and Xhosa culture, but you can clearly see that it is a Black problem because of the population in South Africa. So then we'll have to define what specifically in Zulu culture or Xhosa culture defines the role of a woman. Because I know in Xhosa culture, there's also a lot of things that are being said about praising, the woman in the household. So fundamentally, whether it is a cultural thing, I'm not too sure. But I do know that it is predominantly Black males that is doing this, if you just look at the population aspect of it.
And it's a horrible conversation to have. It's very uncomfortable. And especially when you outline people as Black populations or white populations. That's a very alien concept to me as a Brit coming
in South
out
Africa, that's how we speak, unfortunately.
Yeah. Do you think that's a helpful framing of things, characterizing statistics in Black or white, when perhaps actually, even speaking to Ernst, there's more genetic, cultural, historical variation between Black cultures in South Africa
for sure,
than in Western white Europeans.
Yeah.
So would it not be more helpful for South Africans as a whole to start being more specific with the terminology being used online?
I agree 100%, but you see, this is where the government once again plays a role. So for instance, the government will tell you everything race-based when it comes to, let's say, economic policies, but when it comes to who pays taxes, magically, we don't find out what population or what racial group pays the most or the least, etc. Fundamentally, though, because we are a country that is race-obsessed, not necessarily the people of the country, but definitely the government, I think it's framing it in that aspect. And unfortunately, it's a consequence of apartheid. But the ANC government specifically has focused on that because they know that they can milk that for as long as they can. The apartheid monstrosity, even though the question eventually has to be asked, where does the legacy of apartheid end and where does the failure of the ANC government begin? And that's a conversation that nobody wants to have. But I fully agree with you. I would love to get away from racial classification and perhaps focus on cultures if we need to go that far. Because like you said, there are various tribes in the Black community and cultures in South Africa. When it comes to, white South Africans, it's a bit easier. It's Afrikaners and English. And then even with the colored population, that is I'm not sure if colored is offensive in the UK, but in South Africa, let me just say that calling a colored person a colored is not offensive in South Africa.
I think it's more offensive in America because of their history there, but it's just kind of unused in the UK. I'm kind of still confused as to why the ANC managed to milk this racial classification if people don't want to classify themselves as Black and white in public. Surely in a democratic system, it would go against what they want to achieve by going against what the general population actually does want, which is an end to Blacks did this, whites did this.
Well, let me rephrase that. I think that when it comes to everyday aspects, people don't want to be classified according to their race. But because we have 145 race-based laws in this country that fundamentally benefits Black individuals, I think that a large chunk of this population will gladly identify and tick a box on a government form that says they are Black or an African, because that's one thing that gets me. On a government form, it says African. Now, last time I checked, I'm African. I speak Afrikaans. Afrikaans is Afri, it says the word Africa in it. I know nothing. I think that my forefathers have been here longer than the United States before it existed. So fundamentally, I think that's already a problem, because on a form saying, African, and if you tick that box, then, you can be taken to court for misidentifying yourself. But I think that there's so much benefit to ticking that box and classifying yourself according to race, especially with broad-based Black economic empowerment. So there is an actual fact, a tangible thing for somebody to benefit out of if they actually tick that box. So I think as long as that plays a part, as long as we have race-based legislation in this country that benefits you if you are a specific race, that will be the status quo in South Africa.
Well, this is a whole can of worms to open up, this B policy, as they like to call it. Now, we're no strangers to this in the UK and America in the form of diversity, equity, and inclusion. But the key difference there is the people that are being elevated by policies, they are the so-called victimized minority. It is the minority Black population. There are quotas for them to be part of organizations and to be pilots on airlines and whatever else. But here, what fascinates me is it's the majority that are getting these policies put in place for them.
Yeah.
That must change the dynamics quite a lot.
So, yes. And I can already hear people in the comments that might not agree with us say, well, it's apartheid and it's to redress and to assist what happened during apartheid. And that argument is fine, I would say, for the first maybe 10 to 15 years in South Africa. But by all metrics, if you look at broad-based Black economic empowerment and the race-based legislation to redress and transform the economy to the benefit of Black South Africans, it has failed on every metric.
Well, can I just stop you there? Because I want to hear why, first of all, you think for the first 10 to 15 years, it is justified to have this readdress of apartheid, and where the line is for ending this readdressing.
Yeah. So the reason I say that is because for over 4 decades, apartheid definitely discriminated against Black people in this country. They didn't have the same opportunities to upliftment or to improve themselves on average. So the reason I say the first 10 to 15 years, I mean, look, that wasn't scientific, but what I can say is, unless, at least for some point in time where some form of mechanism of opportunity of upliftment took place. Now, whether, broad-based Black economic empowerment was the right policy to implement that or to do it on race rather than on economic standing, that is something that fundamentally I believe that it should have always been on economic standing rather than race, because we're just replicating what the apartheid system did, but now in a different angle. But the argument over a majority needing redress and transformation, I think if we look at apartheid, like I said, it can be justified initially, but we long over that period in time. And the reason I say that is because in 2025, the unemployment rate is higher now than at the peak of apartheid.
32% now.
Yeah. And youth unemployment, I believe 60%, which is the highest in the world. In the Northern Cape and in the Eastern Cape of this country, there are more people unemployed than employed. So there's clearly a problem here. So if this redress and transformation actually worked and assisted Black people, previously disadvantaged individuals, then we wouldn't see these numbers. So clearly these policies aren't working. And since then, we've also got new young white individuals, new young colored individuals that has been born into this country. And now they are facing these race-based laws. Now, the question is, how can the African National Congress justify race-based legislation in 2025 when they so vehemently fought against it during apartheid? And like I said, there are more race-based laws in South Africa now than at the height of apartheid. So there's just no justification.
Well, I suppose what they would say is that we need this retributive justice. And the reason that the laws now would be race-based is because the ones that were hindering Black people were race-based too. So to compensate for that, you need race-based laws now. And perhaps the readdress shouldn't have been 10 to 15 years, but it should still be going on, because it's tragic what's going on now with white people saying they can't find jobs because of these B policies. But ultimately, I can imagine if you look at the data, it is the Black population that is still overwhelmingly deprived across South Africa. So Talk to me about the argument against this retributive justice, I guess it is, to not keep on going now. Surely they would say what I'm saying, the government here, which is that, look, we had apartheid, race-based policy, so now we need to even that out with race-based policy to make good of the past, of the wrongdoings that happened.
But exactly how does that work then? Because if you do that in the current system, then you are doing exactly what the apartheid system did. So, I mean, the ANC has been on record many times saying how terrible apartheid was and the policies, specifically the race-based policies. And now you're saying that it's to reform, it's to redress, it's to transform the economy. But on both sides, nothing is working. The redress policies isn't working. The race-based legislation policies isn't giving a poor black child a better opportunity. It's not giving a job to poor people. In actual fact, it's just enriching the people that are connected to the ANC. So fundamentally, even on a principled standard, you can't be held accountable for the sins of your father. If your father commits a murder, you as a son or daughter can't go to jail for that. But yet our government believes that it's fine to discriminate against young people that had no hand in apartheid. And we can even argue on whether they actually benefited or not. A conversation also that people aren't having is during apartheid, white people were also sent to prison. White people were also under a dictatorship, I would say, of the government that told them what music they could listen to, who they could interact with. I mean, if a white person was found in a township, they would get arrested and they would be beaten. So, of course, we all know that black people had it the worst during apartheid. But don't for one second think that white people were just living their best lives. They were also under a government that if you went against what they demanded you do, then there would be consequences for you. But fundamentally, if we come back to race-based legislation, it's hypocritical, it is not working, but yet the government is proceeding with it, even though it's not working. There was a document that came out recently that said 100 organizations have benefited to the tune of trillions of rands with broad-based black economic empowerment. Nobody else. So fundamentally, from an ethical point of view, like I said, you can understand for the first 5 or 10 years, perhaps something. I'm not saying that the policies that they implemented were correct, but I'm saying ethically, you could understand why that needed to happen. But unfortunately, they've squandered that opportunity. And now we are a generation and a half later with young individuals that can now unfortunately say that they're also being discriminated against. So the question is, in 40 years from now, will we look back and then go, ooh, the apartheid regime of the ANC and how they discriminated against minorities in this country? That's the question.
I guess what they would say, and not that I would perhaps hold this position, but just to play devil's advocate here, is that this is still closely within living memory and it will be affecting people directly. And there will be an obvious line of causation from apartheid that we can nip in the bud now if we persevere with this. So surely this is kind of our last chance now, the next 2 decades, to make good of this wrongdoing before it does get more convoluted and we're talking about generation on generation of reparations, which is much more like the argument we're having in the UK about slavery reparations from 400 years ago, where it's absurd and it's much more difficult to square that circle because you're trying to account for 10 generations gone having suffered, which makes no sense.
Yeah.
But perhaps this is different when it is still in living memory and we have this opportunity now to make good of it.
But they're already starting to use the phrases of colonialism in South Africa now.
How so?
Well, they're starting to say, well, it all went wrong when Jan van Riebeeck arrived in South Africa. I mean...
2,000 years ago.
Yeah, 2,000 years. Yeah.
Have you seen that clip?
Yeah, that clip, the member of parliament. He came 2,000 years ago. It's like, no, it wasn't Jesus that arrived. But fundamentally, you can see the tactics that is being used by specifically the ANC MK, which is Jacob Zuma's offshoot party, and then Julius Malema's EFF, in which they are now already shifting the narrative now to colonialism, because they realized that apartheid was only roughly 4 decades, and they realized that we already 94, so we are 31 years into a democracy. So with the advent of technology as well, mind you, a lot of people don't talk about during apartheid when these policies were implemented, if you wanted to communicate with somebody, you had to send them a letter. Versus in modern days, you can send an email and it's instant communication. The same with building houses. Now it takes days, where in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s, it would take weeks or a month. So with all of this technology to their advantage, we still have a situation where none of these policies are actually uplifting people, and now they are moving the goalposts back to colonialism. Noting, though, that the Afrikaner is also a culture that suffered under the hands of the British during the Anglo-Boer War.
Sorry about that.
No, I don't blame you for that. You know, that's the beauty. I don't hold you accountable for the sins of your father. And neither am I a victim in that, because, you know, I wasn't part of that. And fundamentally, that is the point. It's, I don't want young South Africans to suffer because of something that their fathers or their grandfathers did. And we can fix this very easily. We can remove all the race-based legislation and just replace it with economic standing. The moment you do that, the overwhelming majority of people that's going to benefit is Black South Africans. But you're not going to miss a underprivileged white or colored individual, Indian individual that can't benefit from these race-based legislation. Fundamentally, that is the right way to do it. So the question is, why is the government not doing it? And you mentioned an interesting point, because the government consistently say that this is not retribution. This is not to get back at white people. But everything tells us that they're doing that, because the government account on X recently came out and said there are no race-regulated laws in South Africa. The question is, do they know that people can Google? Do they know that you can ask AI? And if you Google it, immediately it tells you there's 145 race-based laws in this country that discriminate directly based on race. You can go to tender documents. I'm not sure. I'll provide you the link if people in the people watching would like to verify what I'm saying. There is at least 6,500 tender documents that is open, meaning the closing date hasn't happened, where white people can't apply for that tender because they are white. Now, tell me fundamentally whether that is right or wrong in 2025, 31 years after we became a democracy.
Well, there seems to be more of an international outcry, more against the government and Ramaphosa himself.
Yeah.
And you see this with the gender-based violence stuff. That seems to have gone pretty viral, and I have friends hearing about it that aren't in South Africa and have nothing to do with South Africa. Same goes with, obviously, the incident that unfolded earlier in the year with Trump in the White House and Ramaphosa pulling up the video of the farm murders and exposing him for that. But it doesn't seem like he's actually changing anything, perhaps alluding to what you said earlier here with the lip service occurring rather than anything more substantial. So the G20 is coming up. We're recording this the same day that it's being posted, so we can keep this nice and topical. We've got all the nations coming in. America aren't sending anyone except for someone to collect, I think, the last ceremony or close out the ceremony.
Exactly.
Just to show face and show that they're still the top dogs. But they've pulled out otherwise.
Yeah, they're not participating in any discussion. But if you go, you see, social media in South Africa is a big part of the barometer of what's happening in this country. Now, of course, the overwhelming majority of people aren't actually on social media in South Africa, but you can still get a sense of how the nation feels. And just with what you stated there's a lot of anti-American sentiment on X, specifically with this, because Cyril Ramaphosa went on a platform and said, the United States is rethinking of coming to the G20. Well, technically the G16, I believe. And that was a blatant lie. I know that what is her name? The press secretary for the United States, she came
Caroline Levitt.
There we go. She fundamentally said that he was running his mouth. And then she laid it out. She said, no, we are just communicating that we are coming to actually receive whatever we need to receive because that's a handover ceremony that's been happening all the time.
Well, I've got the letter here and it says, as head of delegation, Charge Dillard will participate in the G20 presidency handover ceremony as part of the closing session on November 23rd. To support his participation, the US Embassy requests assistance with the following, and then it's just accreditation for the US delegation. That's it. That's their letter.
Yeah. And they're sending 8 people. They've asked for accreditation for 8 people. They're not participating in any discussions. The point I'm making is when you go on X, it's just like this victory lap by South Africans that are saying, oh, look, the United States cowered and they now participated, which is a blatant lie. But then again, I'm not sure in the UK, but in South Africa, we have a serious problem with bot accounts on social media, specifically from Zimbabwe. And what they do is they drive a narrative. There has been some investigations done and they get paid for every single post. And we are talking about hundreds of thousands of bot accounts. So they create this narrative, and there's a running joke in South Africa.
Well,
yeah, sorry.
Who's paying them?
That's the question. We're trying to uncover that. But from a conspiracy theory point of view, obviously, we think that the people that are behind it is the same people that the ANC usually runs to when they require money. So Iran, as an example, and China as another example. That is just speculation, of course, but you will find that the ANC was nearly bankrupt before the last election. They needed to get bailed out. I believe, I can't remember the amount of money, but it was substantial. It would have, assets were attached for them to, at what is their, I'm just thinking at their head offices. And eventually what happened is, out of the blue, they managed to settle that amount. And then they had enough money to run an entire election campaign. So the question is, where did that money come from? Because on the one hand, you say you've got no money, and suddenly you've got enough money to pay what you owe and then run an election campaign that is literally hundreds of millions of rands. So the question then is, who is the ANC aligned with? Iran, we know that for a fact, and China and Russia, of course. And we know how good some of these nations are at manipulating social media. And fundamentally, the question is, we know, I believe the ANC is involved. The question that you need to ask is, what government is controlling them to implement this? What nation is doing this?
Well, we have the G20 summit coming up. You've got all of these bot accounts flooding X. What kind of things are they actually saying en masse?
So I can use myself as an example. With the statement by Cyril Ramaphosa that said everybody, when he specifically stated that the United States will participate, then when I retweeted that with the proof from the secretary stating that that is actually not taking place, most of the comments, and it's an influx of comments of people with 100 followers and they following 10,000 people, the typical traits of bot accounts. Everybody was saying, oh, stop lying. Oh, no, they've given in. And the narrative is just clear. And you can see this on most prominent anti-government voices accounts where something like this is said. I mean, you know how social media works. You can clearly pick up when it's a bot account and what they've said previously. And the fact that this was flooding in, and also a lot of activity now that the G20 is here where they are speaking negatively about the Solidariteit. I'm not sure if you even know what that is. The banner that was removed by the government. We can just say that because that's what happened. So let me give you some context, and this might blow your mind. So we know that gender-based violence protests are taking place, right? And even Cyril Ramaphosa yesterday acknowledged it and say that something needs to be done about it.
And declared it a crisis.
Yes. So that happened because of protest action. Now, what Solidarity, which is a trade union in South Africa that represent a lot of white people, and AfriForum, the whole conglomerate that is supporting, the rights of everybody in this country, but specifically minority rights. A banner was put up along in Johannesburg that said, South Africa is the most race-regulated country in the world. Within 4 hours, that banner was removed, and Panyaza Lesufi, who is the premier of Gauteng, said pretty much supported the fact that illegal activity took place because the banner was paid for the advertising company. It was put up and it was removed within 4 hours because it embarrassed the ANC government. And that was obviously one of the routes that would lead to where the people would meet at the G20. So now you also have the situation where the president is happy to talk about gender-based violence, something that he has declared over 30 times since 2018 on a public platform, and nothing has been done about it. But he doesn't want the race regulation to come out or the race-regulated laws in this country to come out when it's there for everybody to see. So fundamentally, you can see that there's something behind that is protecting the government and trying to portray this image of, oh, South Africa is united, everybody's happy, everybody's being treated well, when in actual fact, we all know what's actually happening in South Africa.
Does it worry you, the rise of these bot accounts on the internet? I can imagine as things unfold and they get better at masking the fact that they are bots, you're going to see more planned cancellations where people get deplatformed just by virtue of someone pulling a trigger and chucking a bunch of money at a bunch of people in Zimbabwe to create accounts.
Well, that's what happened to me, fundamentally. I was a member of parliament, and then a video from 15 years ago in which I used hyperbole to talk about the double standards of racism in this country. Then I used the K word and the N word to illustrate a point because it was talking about kill the boer. So I was talking about how a political party individual could sing a song like that about killing people. And then I said, imagine what would happen if I said kill all the Ks, kill all the Ns. Of course, it was to illustrate how absurd it is. And then 15 years later, that video surfaced, the mainstream media used 4% of the video, leaving out 96% of the context, where they just used me uttering the words. And of course, when you see that in a country like that we live in right now, of course, the K and the N word can't be used. And yet I was removed from my political party and I lost my seat in parliament. So that deplatforming has already happened to me. Ironically, that video, the point of the video was proven 15 years later. And I was obviously the one that proved that point. But to illustrate what you are talking about, no, I don't necessarily believe that these bot accounts have got so much control. And the reason I say that is because if you are an ex-user in South Africa, when you look at how the bots deal with the EFF, you would swear that the EFF will get 99% of the vote in this country. And then when the actual voting takes place, then, the silent majority comes out. So I do think that they can shape narratives. But ultimately, though, I think that at the moment, it's not that big of a threat. It's just, you can see it, you can spot it. And it's a little bit sickening to see that the government is behind this, in my opinion, because who else would praise a government with the highest unemployment rate, one of the highest murder rates? Who would do that without getting some form of compensation for that?
Yeah, well, I love getting the microscope out and analysing all of these different cultural components here in South Africa, because usually when I'm doing podcasts in the UK or the US, there are things that I've picked up on that are clear patterns, and you can drop them into conversations and use them interchangeably because it's objective data backed, and there are certain trends that I'm aware of through my knowledge that have unfolded the last 10 years, 20 years in terms of social media, as an example. Whereas here, it's just a completely different world. And I think there are a few things that are coming your way, unfortunately, flushed down the toilet from us. And vice versa, we've got a few things to learn from you guys that are perhaps coming our way. And this is why I really appreciate chats like these, because it's an opportunity to learn. And this is the whole point, right, of doing what we do, is sharing ideas, stress testing them, and ultimately trying to pave the way for the future. And what I see in the West is that this is a lot more of a pressing concern in terms of how social media shapes narratives. And people are at the mercy of the online world more than ever, to the point where the online world used to reflect reality. You would report on a news channel at 7 p.m. when everyone was sat down with their supper in England and what's gone on during the day, right? Whereas now, the day unfolds based on the trends and the reports on the 24-hour rolling news cycle that have come out. So now, social media isn't a reflection of reality. Reality is a reflection of social media in the West. And that is fucking terrifying. Because reality, sorry to state the obvious here, is much different to an algorithm-driven system that thrives off of engagement and negativity bias and hateful content from either side, because you're going to get more clicks. I don't know where we're going in the West, but at the moment, I'm not optimistic. I'm not seeing the glass half full the majority of the time, because as soon as you let yourself be at the mercy of these algorithms and let that shape what you're doing for a career or politically, or the infographics you're posting online, you're fucked. Things aren't unfolding in real time and they're shaped. So I'm glad you don't think it's as much of an issue here, but I wonder if you can see, perhaps as there's more international outcry against Ramaphosa and the ANC government, and there's more domestic outcry against it too, if there's a slip on power there, do you think these mechanisms would come into play more with the social media and the news channels?
I think the more people in South Africa that get access to the internet and join social media, I think it might play a bigger part. But then again, we're very lucky in South Africa that the alternative media in South Africa has built up a strong following. I think mainstream media is clearly very biased and the mouthpiece of the ANC in essence. We are actually very close to one of the buildings of one of the biggest media houses in Africa, and they clearly drive a narrative. They do debunking articles where, in actual fact, in their articles they are blatantly lying, and you can prove that they are lying. An example, quickly, is that they say that the refugee program is only open to white Afrikaners. Blatant lie. If you go and read the actual document, it clearly states minorities. Now, that includes colored people and Indian people. So I'm more concerned over mainstream media having the leftist slant that they have rather than social media and the influence there. Because you rightfully said, we have gone from mainstream media giving us a neutral point of view and then social media talking about it. Now what is happening is news break on social media and mainstream media tries to catch up and then report on it with a little slant. Added to that, of course, I mean, we survived Bell Pottinger thanks to, the guys over in the UK with the White Monopoly Capital slogan. I'm not sure how familiar you are with this. Bell Pottinger was hired in essence by Jacob Zuma and the Guptas to come up with a tactic in which they could make it seem like white people still own most of everything in this country. And then they framed it as white monopoly capital. That was done by Bell Pottinger, a UK company. And eventually what happened is, over the years, people started figuring out that, this is in actual fact a paid-for campaign to go after some of the wealthy white individuals in this country and portray them in a negative light and make them seem like they actually in control and the puppet master of the ANC. And then all of that got exposed, and eventually Bell Pottinger in the UK shut down. So that is just one example of how they've manipulated the narrative.
How do I know that you're not just cherry picking because you disagree with this narrative and you're on the fringe, they're not?
Well, you can go and read from various different sources. If you're talking specifically about Pottinger, I mean...
Not specifically, more in general in terms of the shaped narrative that's controlled by the ANC.
Well, I mean, you can just look at the facts. If you doubt anything that I've got to say, then you can go and actually read it. Unlike the ANC that has... And the reason I don't call it the GNU, just, in case people wondering why Renaldo isn't referring it to as a government of national unity, is because the ANC hasn't changed anything. They're still the biggest party and they are still implementing their policies. Some of the other political parties in the GNU is just happy to be along for the ride because for the first time they have a ministerial position. But fundamentally, you can go and check what I'm saying here and use various different sources to find out whether what I'm saying is the truth or not. Like I said, the government is denying that there's 145 race-based laws in this country. If you don't believe me, ask Grok, ask OpenAI, which is the polar opposites of one another, and you will find the answer there. So to answer your question, just fact check me.
What do you see going forwards as the cultural landscape for the media world, specifically alternative media, perhaps, in South Africa?
I think the role of alternative media would be to hold mainstream media to account. That's definitely one aspect of it, because I've always said, especially mainstream media in South Africa, with ad revenue, going down the drain, them having difficulty for printed media that pretty much doesn't exist anymore, they have to find alternative revenue sources, or they have to become more like tabloids to get the clicks that'll generate incomes for them. Because the fundamental question is, why does a mainstream media outlet exist first and foremost? It's to turn a profit for their shareholders. Secondly, it's to report on the news. So if they're never ever going to turn a profit for their shareholders, then the question is, do they just continue to report fairly and accurately on the news, or do they become more sensationalist in order to get clicks to generate a revenue for their company? So I think the fundamental difference there is most alternative media is not in it for the profit or for money. It is to actually report on what's happening in South Africa. Now, the question is, alternative media mostly is YouTube, mostly X, TikTok users that talk about what's happening in this country. So I would argue that just on a principled basis, I would trust alternative media more, because their goal is to get more followers. It's not monetary. Whereas with mainstream media, the fundamental goal is more money. Now, out of those two, as bad as both might be, I would rather have the person that is just honestly chasing to have more clout and have more presence on social media than a company that is putting profits above everything else, because without the profits, they don't exist. That's the way I see it.
You don't think it's more dangerous to have alternative media that are chasing clout and specifically want to create more noise than profit?
I'm saying worst case scenario. So, for instance, I'll use myself as an example. The numbers doesn't matter to me. But I can't say the same about somebody else that might be talking. So I'm saying at worst, I fundamentally believe, and I mean, I'm part of the Truth Report, which I know for a fact that people that's on it is there to improve South Africa. We have people that are already very famous and very well known that's part of that, and they form part of that. And they're not clout chasing, they're not chasing more followers. But fundamentally, let's say that there is 5% of the people on either side that is doing that. I would rather have a person that just wants to get more followers than people that's chasing money, because money is the root of all evil.
Yeah, it's an interesting framing. I don't know if I agree.
Okay.
And I think that the danger is when people proclaim to be truth seekers, and this isn't necessarily directed at anyone at all, but generally speaking, you've had this emergence of truth seekers, so to speak, where they're free speech channels and it's free speech for me, but not for thee. As soon as someone does something that goes against their narrative and they finally flip the tables, they're not too happy about it. And you've seen this in the UK recently with Israel-Palestine debacles unfolding, where famous singers and artists have gone up on stage and they've chanted, I think one of them was death to the IDF on stage. I can't remember the name of the singer, Bob Dylan. And it was this whole thing. And that guy, he's a prick. I really dislike him from everything I've seen. He's clearly not sensitive towards the issues actually unfolding. He's clearly pandering to his audience and he's doing what you're saying, which is clout chasing. But, and I haven't made my mind up about this, I don't think he infringed on the free speech that we at least used to have in the UK. Yet all of these right-wingers that are truth seekers, ardent free speech activists, they came out crying, asking for him to be arrested and deplatformed. So I do worry about the framing of truth seekers and alternative voices that are now going away from the evil mainstream media and paving the way forwards. Because if there's one thing that's more dangerous than someone who admits they don't know, it's someone that thinks they know or that are telling people that they know or acting in a faithful manner, but aren't. Because there's the element of deceit there.
Yeah. Well, fundamentally, I will say that I'm a free speech absolutist. Can't speak for everybody, but I mean, he's allowed to say whatever he wants. Look, I mean, there's clearly hate speech is, especially if you live in a violent country, then you have to consider, what somebody says and how that can impact. For instance, kill the Boer. That is a clear instruction to kill specific cultural group. So I believe that, for instance, Bob Dylan, I think it's fine. He can say whatever he wants to say. What it boils down to, and I mean, you guys are going through it in the UK. I mean, that is on another level. People getting arrested for social media posts. It is absurd. And at least we still have that freedom. At least I still have that freedom in South Africa, even though cancel culture came for me. Fundamentally, I believe that it's rather to have all of this out in the air and you can see where people stand rather than keeping it behind closed doors. So fundamentally, I believe that freedom of speech, unless it is really an incitement to kill somebody or to kill, that would lead to the death of people, I believe you should be allowed to say whatever you want to say, including a word. Because here's, I'm not sure if I'm going to go a little bit off track, but I think it's important just for context. The old South African flag is banned in South Africa. The Constitutional Court banned it and called it hate speech. Now, let's break that down. It's a piece of cloth, right? Kill the Boer, kill the farmer. Went through the same constitutional court and they said there's no problem with that. We can sing it. It's an old struggle song. Question is, what struggle is there in 2025? So a piece of cloth is banned, but people actually inciting violence or asking for people to be killed is 100% fine. That's the issue that we are facing. And I believe that is also why alternative media is so important, specifically in the South African context. Look, I think I'm not sure about, I know you've got your tabloids in the UK and people say the most terrible things on those tabloids. But fundamentally in South Africa, we have a situation where crime is prevalent. And if you're going to incite people the whole time and create a narrative about people, then that needs to be addressed. And unfortunately, mainstream media is not doing that. And that is why alternative media has reached this point. And I can say without a shadow of a doubt that the overwhelming majority of people in the alternative media space just report on the facts, what mainstream media used to do. And also the narrative that needs to be changed, because so many people around the world believe that any white South African that is talking negatively about his country or her country is a racist or misses the old days. When in actual fact, it's the vast majority of white people in this country either weren't alive during apartheid, or the people that were part of apartheid in the government are all 80 years or older. So fundamentally, every single white South African, the overwhelming majority, are people that didn't benefit from apartheid, weren't born during apartheid.
Or they'd have to take out their false teeth to sing it.
Exactly. Yeah. And when they get criticized both by the government and international community, and when they speak out, then unfortunately they're labeled racist, or they're seen as a backwards individual that don't understand the fundamentals of what happened during apartheid whilst they are being discriminated against. So I think that is why the alternative space is so important, specifically if you look at the narrative. I'm not sure how it is in the UK. I'm assuming it's also very leftist based.
It was dominated for a long time by left-wing outlets. I think that's changing. I think companies, well, I say companies, I guess it is a company, GB News, they've been emerging and they've been crushing it online. And I do think the vast majority of consumption now, it's heading in the right-wing direction. But we certainly have this issue of, being patriotic is equivalent to being racist in many people's eyes, or at least in the silent or the vocal minority's eyes. And what you're seeing now is this uprising where people are saying, no, we've been lied to, we're sick of this, and we're going to show our colors. We're going to raise the flag, as was one of the trends recently in the UK. And then you get these horrible minorities that attach themselves to these bigger contingents of groups who actually are far right. No, they don't just believe in freedom of speech or being proud of your country. They're actual far right individuals attaching themselves to that group, tarnishing the name. And actually their ideas are able to promulgate more because they're attaching themselves to the silent majority that are now starting to speak up, and they're kind of sneaking their ideologies in because people are sick and tired of this bullshit that's been going on in terms of being racist to wear the England football kit or whatever it is, to take an extreme example. And you see it in America too. And that is what gives rise to individuals like Nick Fuentes, for example, where people are sick of left-wing, woke media, whatever you want to call them, and they overcorrect. This pendulum's always swinging, and now it's swung too far back in the other direction.
So the Overton window, in essence, has moved too far to the left. I think the entire world was a bit, when they started saying men can be women and women can be men and men can give birth and men can participate in women's sport and they can go into the changing rooms of women without actually transitioning. That's the best part. It's like, oh yes, I'm transgender, but I'm not transitioned yet. Okay, well, wait until you transition, then maybe then you can. But the argument fundamentally is the Overton window shift too far to the left, and now it's coming back. But I really do hope that now, once again, it doesn't swing too far to the right. I would say in South Africa especially, there was a far right-wing movement called the AWB, the Afrikaner Weerstandsbeweging, that fundamentally, I would say, believed pretty much what Hitler believed about the Jews, that the white Afrikaner is better than the black South African or the black person in South Africa. And that, I mean, they were relatively, supported, but not had big support. And then they went into nothingness. And ever since then, we don't really have a right wing in South Africa. Truly, we don't. But yet, every single person, specifically a white person with an opinion, when their opinion is anti-government or anti-lies, then they are framed as a right-wing movement or as a right-wing individual. So fundamentally, they're being dishonest in talking about these. I mean, for instance, I'm labeled a far right-wing. I'm labeled an extremist for saying, let's not have 145 race-based laws. let's have equality. Let's focus on the poorest of the poor and uplift all South Africans. That, according to mainstream media, because I have been a massive target by mainstream media, just one publication has written 50 articles over me, about me. Thanks though for the press ombudsman that we have in this country, but there's no teeth. So they can write whatever they want to write about you. Then you lodge a complaint, you wait a month and a half. They have to then perhaps apologize to you and they put it behind a paywall. So fundamentally, the problem that we have in this country is that we don't have a press ombudsman with teeth that can fine or that can blacklist or remove somebody in the sense that they're not able to talk about the news anymore. And until that changes, things aren't going to improve. So also the fact that Trump, when he wrote that letter in February, I think that for a lot of white South Africans, wasn't necessarily because they're Trump supporters, but they're just happy that somebody put the spotlight on what is happening in South Africa. Because imagine this. I mean, you go through an atrocious system of apartheid, but then you would expect the government would never ever return to something like that. And then unfortunately for the white South Africans in this country, if they call out what is happening, then the rest of the world looks at it and goes, you're just not happy that you aren't the main people in the country anymore and that you can't oppress black people. But in actual fact, it is legitimate concerns over reverse racism, reverse discrimination. And fundamentally, like I said earlier, there's more race-based legislation now than at the height of apartheid. So the question that you have to ask is the African National Congress any better than the apartheid government?
I want to press you a little bit on this distinction of hate speech versus free speech. You say you're a free speech absolutist, but that kill the Boer should be banned.
Yeah, look, I need to take that back. When I say the free speech absolutist, I would refrain and say I believe fundamentally in free speech. The only thing that would prevent me from allowing that free speech is when it is an incitement to kill or to cause physical harm to anybody. For instance, shouting bomb or there's a bomb in a cinema. And as an example, that is the only reason. Other than that, I believe that you should say whatever you want to say. But kill the Boer is an incitement to violence. And there has been, and your interview with Adams Roots probably showed, he demonstrated a lot of these cases where the blood of the victims, they use that to write things on the wall and racial slogans. So, I mean, clearly there is a causal relationship between singing the song and actual victims. So when it comes to that, so I do retract that statement, not perhaps an absolutist, but 99%, I would say.
I want to have the uncomfortable conversation without being one of these gotcha mainstream journalists that bring stuff up from 16 years ago. But this did break fairly recently, I would say, and there hasn't been that much long-form coverage of it. There's only been these out-of-context clips about why you had to step down from your position in the government. Do you think that that's not similar, what you said, saying kill the K-word, kill the N-word, to kill the Boer? Should that not be outlawed too? And actually these 50 articles about you are justified?
So let's go back to the video. And I mean, the video isn't actually even available. So people have passed their judgment on a 4-second clip. The point of the video, so the intention was to demonstrate what is wrong in this country. And that was in 2010. So that is when Julius Malema was still the youth leader of the ANC. He came out publicly for the very first time and sang kill the Boer, kill the farmer. So it's the first time in our democracy that song was sung. So I understand now people are desensitized to it.
It was fresh then.
Fresh. It was the Soccer World Cup year. People were supposed to unite. So we also had that moment of perhaps this is our 1995 moment again, because we also went through a dip as a country and we needed that unity. And then out comes this politician that is the youth leader that is supposed to be the youth of this country. And he sings a song, Kill the Boer, Kill the Farmer, in the rendition that he did. I mean, it's not the W Bono, I believe. It's not similar to what Jacob Zuma used to sing. So he comes out and sings this. And then I look at this and I go, but this goes against what we are trying to achieve as a rainbow nation moving forward. And I was a little bit more liberal back then than what I am now. I would classify myself as a conservative now. And then fundamentally, I made the video and I said, How would you as a black individual feel if I had to sing, kill, and then I used the terms? It wasn't directed at anybody specific. I didn't say Julius Malema or the ANC. I used it as a hyperbole. So, if you want to compare the two, then I would say that that is not correct, because I used it as an example to say, how would you as a black man feel if you heard this being sung in public? And then I led to the point that I didn't mean what I said. I actually said it directly after I said it. That was edited out of the video clip. And then I went further and discussed why this is a problem, why it's not correct to sing something like that, what Nelson Mandela taught us. So fundamentally, if you watch the video, you can see that it didn't come from the same place as where Julius Malema's version of singing that song came from. So yes, but also remember, in 2010, when the K word was used, and the reason I used the N word is because back then, a lot of my audience were from expat countries. So the United States, Australia, Canada. And I used the N word specifically to illustrate to the people overseas what I'm talking about. So that illustrates my point that it wasn't targeted at black South Africans. It was to illustrate what we are experiencing in this country. So that was fundamentally the point of it. And then in 2010, like I said, mainstream media referred to the word when they were talking in their articles, whether it's a news story. Let's say there was a racist incident that took place. Then they would use the word. They would say, this individual het vandag, and then they would say the word. So also, you are judging me on a different period in time when that word was, of course, you shouldn't have used that word to direct it at somebody, but talking about the word and using it as hyperbole was perfectly normal. That video featured in 2010 on Third Degree, which at that point in time was the most prominent South African political channel. And that video was available for 3 years. It had 100,000 views on the video. Nobody ever complained about me using the term. On Third Degree, the host that is very well known for attacking politicians and targeting people that she believes is racist didn't bring it up once. So then fast forward, I removed the video subsequently because I could see that the Overton window was shifting and that you could potentially be cancelled now for the words that you uttered. And then eventually we are now, I am a member of parliament for a month, and then this comes out strategically out of nowhere. A 4-second clip, 94% or 96% of the context completely lost. So in a long-winded way to answer your question, no, it's not the same.
Yeah, it angers me so much. And having been in the media game since I was 15 doing political podcasts, I see it all the time. Stuff getting cut out of context and weaponized against individuals. And the thing is, you light that spark and it burns so bright that actually when the other 96% gets released, it kind of doesn't matter. It's too late. The reputation has been tarnished and that's it. I do want to push you on this, and I hope it doesn't sound too adversarial because I'm all here for testing ideas and getting the truth. I'm one of the proclaimed truth seekers, so I hope you don't mind. But if there was someone that came out in the ANC and there was a video that resurfaced of them from 14 years ago or however long, where after making these points, perhaps they were referring to the apartheid and they were using slurs for white people, not that they hit the same way as they do for black people. And after that, they continued having this visceral interaction with the camera and saying something like, this fucking white idiot is doing this. Like you did, saying this fucking black idiot has done this. To me, if I was a South African, I wouldn't want them in government. And I think that follow-up there, charged with that visceral emotion and clearly not alluding to anything like the first statement did of making this comparison with kill the Boers and kill the K-word, kill the N-word, that tells a story for me. And that's not to say I sit here judging you now.
For sure.
I believe in forgiveness and people changing and the rest of it. But for me, that's just a line that's crossed. And if it was done by an ANC member, surely you wouldn't want them in parliament either if that video resurfaced.
Well, fundamentally, look, I get where you come from, but then with that point, then you can never ever grow as a human being. So forevermore, for evergreen, we can use things in the past against people, even if they've grown, even if they fundamentally changed. And, if I look at the video now, of course, I would not have used the K or the N word, but I think it's also a little bit different because in the South African context, we refer to white and black. It's not an issue. So when somebody says a black idiot or a white idiot, it's not necessarily racially toned. I really don't know how to explain it other than South Africans being able to understand that.
It's more descriptive.
Yeah, it's not necessarily an insult. I didn't say, oh, he's an idiot because he's black. It's just the black idiot. But also then again, that was emotive. It was very angry. That's what I did 15 years ago. You also have to understand the context that South Africans experience, especially white South Africans experienced that during that time. And once again, it's a song that is asking for you to be killed. By all metrics, I think that I handled that actually relatively well, considering that somebody in a very high position within the governing party of this country asked for the killing of 4 million people. I fundamentally think that that's a massive problem. But ironically, the person that sang that song is still in parliament today.
Stick with me on the point of the follow-up to that, saying this fucking black idiot, because I find that more interesting than this comparative piece.
Okay.
And I just wonder what the reaction would be if a video resurfaced now of someone in the ANC who's black saying that about whites 14 years ago, if you would be okay with that. Do you think that would be fair?
I would say if it was 15 years ago, because look, you're asking the wrong person because I've gone through the experience.
I think I'm asking the right person.
No, but what I mean is I've already gone through that experience, and now I obviously wouldn't judge somebody if it is based on similar circumstances. However, I mean, I had an interaction with the Minister Gayton McKenzie now, where I brought up his criminal history in the lead up to the elections, and what has happened with me definitely humbled me in realizing that, hey, I mean, people grow and people change. So you can't necessarily also just keep on judging people for something they said many, many years ago. Since that, I've gone through an entirely different process. And also, I was a young individual. So if people want to play this game where we're going to cancel people for things that they said 15, 20 years ago, then, I think everybody's going to have a bad time, especially with the fact that we live in an era of social media where people can take whatever you say out of context. So if people want to play this game, then they can play this game. They literally took me at my worst moment in the worst situation that I was in, and fundamentally still took me out of context in order to make sense. The publication that took me, that reported on that, they had to apologize to me, but the damage was done. They breached, I think, the press code on 4 instances, and they eventually were kicked out of the press ombuds or the press council. So the damage was done. And to answer your question, I would seriously look at somebody like that and then look at what they've done subsequently. However, ironically, there are people that 15 years ago said those type of things, and they still say it to this day.
Well, the chance of kill the boat is a good example.
That's one example. We've got Andile Mnatama that he was part of Black First, Land First, and now he's part of Jacob Zuma's Mkhonto weSizwe party. He famously said, for every one black person, we will kill 5 of them. Out of nowhere. I mean, nobody actually made, I think it was Johan Rupert that just made a tongue-in-cheek comment about, the taxi industry and how they need to be taken to task. Also that the fact that they don't pay tax. And then fundamentally, he came out and he said, for every one of us they kill, we will kill 5 of them. And then he said, we'll kill the dogs, we'll kill the cats, we'll kill the women, we'll kill the children. That was, I think, 5-6 years ago. He's a member of parliament. He's in parliament right now. And then, of course, every EFF member of parliament that we have, that is also at every rally singing, kill the boer, kill the farmer. So once again, it boils down to this double standards of racism that exists. Fundamentally, if you ask, should I still be in parliament? The answer is unequivocal yes. Because what I've done since that video in my community as a ward councillor, building up to becoming a member of parliament, I think when you look at the action rather than, what mainstream media would want to tell you, it is a clear answer. As an example, I was the ward councillor in the most diverse ward in our metro, and I received 94% of the vote. So the question is, do I regret saying the KNN word? Yes, I can sit here now, especially with the Overton window where it is, and say, that wasn't a great idea. I could have used a different way of approaching it. But using specifically what you said with the black idiot, I would say that I still don't see a problem with that, even today. because there are descriptive words that we use when we say, this white guy is being a fool, that black guy is doing this. I think the racial sensitivity in the rest of the world might be a little bit more than in South Africa.
It must be very different, because if that was in the UK, it's like, look, you've just said this using these slurs, and then directly after, you've now used the descriptive term of a black idiot. Like, that's just a no-go. So maybe it's just different in the UK.
I mean, to be fair,
linguistically.
To be fair, in the UK, if you post something on social media that might just be a little bit, off what mainstream media wants to say, then you can get arrested for it. So I think you guys are a little bit in a worse place than what we are at the moment when it comes to social media and the government interfering.
Definitely with the government interfering with social media. I'm intrigued about the fallout from this, with tens of thousands of people signing a petition to have you resign and then you subsequently stepping down. Talk to me a little bit about what that was like, that whole situation unfolding last year.
So you go from the absolute high of being elected as one of the 400 people to represent South Africans. And I did it on merit. I didn't lick one ass. I didn't kiss one ass. I did it on my own way. I had a YouTube channel that was, I would say, controversial because I was calling out what is happening in this country. Everything that you technically in South Africa should not do to become a member of parliament. And then, yes, I think I vividly remember that I was actually at the president being sworn in ceremony, and the planes and the helicopters were coming over with the South African flags, and I received this message, did you ever use the K word in a video? And I was like, no, I can't recall, because I've made like 4,000 videos, and I mean, this was 15 years ago. So I said, no, I can't recall doing that, and then they sent me, I said, can you please send me the clip? And the journalist refused to send me the clip. And I was like, well, then I don't have a comment. If you're seeing something, maybe it's AI. And then, of course, that was taken way out of context after the fact. It's funny enough now with AI, you can create everything you want to. But a year ago, that was like just before you could do all of these things.
Yeah.
So then I got the messages. The journalist, ironically now, is part of a political party here in Cape Town. No corruption there whatsoever. But I looked at it and I was like, no, I don't know. And then the fallout started happening. They're saying, we are going to print, you need to respond or else, which also meant that it broke the press council's rules. You have to give adequate time to respond.
Yeah.
And because I wasn't at home and I couldn't go and check what this video was, and the journalist refused to share the information with me, which in hindsight, I know now why, because he snipped it to that 4-second clip. Yeah. But when I got home a couple of hours later, because I had to fly from Johannesburg back to where I'm based, I saw the video and then I immediately shared it with my political party, which they were aware of this video in 2013 already. Wow. And I'll get to that. I'm sorry if it's a very long story, but I want to make sure I cover it. I immediately told my chief whip in Parliament. I sent it to Helen Ziller, and I sent it to John Steenhuisen. Those were the 3 people I sent the video to. And I said, here is the video. You are aware of it. We discussed this in 2013 when I was part of the Young Leaders program. And then it went dead quiet after that. And then, of course, the news broke. And then I understood why he didn't share it with me, because they uploaded the 4-second video clip without any of the other context. And then, what subsequently happened is mainstream media had a field day. There was a lot of people that obviously defended and said, but where's the whole video? Play the whole video so that we can just have context. It went from a very high to a very, very low, because I knew that, I've always been fighting for a better South Africa for everybody, not necessarily for Afrikaners only, not only for us as Zulu people, for everybody. And then to have somebody that's got an agenda against you, because that's clearly what it was. That video was available for 3 years. Then I deleted the video because obviously I knew, the framing of it in the context of who and what South Africa became would not be accepted.
It's political gold dust.
And I also apologized publicly for that video. I believe it was 2013, if I'm not mistaken. So 3 years. When I deleted the video, I apologized. And then, you consider that would be dealt with then. But of course, mainstream media doing what they did, they ran the narrative. And then a lot of pressure was put on my political party at the time, the Democratic Alliance. I would have believed that they would have had my back, because there were previous instances of previous individuals that was also accused of things. And then eventually came out that, well, if you look at everything, it's not the case. Strangely enough, I think it was 4 months before that, the Democratic Alliance itself was almost was accused of treason because they had an advert where they burned a printed paper of the South African flag. And then the outrage and outcry over clearly people misinterpreting the advert, that was putting the party into disrepute. So the reason I was dismissed from the Democratic Alliance was not because of racism. It was because I didn't declare the video to them, which I did, and I had evidence of that. So a 3-month investigation by the Federal Legal Commission found me guilty, but for not disclosing it again, even though there's conflict as to once declared, always declared, Long story short, eventually it led to the 3-month investigation. They said, okay, no, he can remain as a member of parliament. It went up to the federal executive, which Helen Zille and John Steenhuisen sits on, and they overturned that decision in 1 hour, removing me from parliament. So fundamentally, I mean, the Democratic Alliance went against their own constitution. And to this day, I don't have the minutes of that federal executive meeting. I don't know what was discussed that made them overrule a 3-month investigation with lawyers that actually know the law and the constitution to people that is layman when it comes to the law. So here we are now, but I'm part of a different political party, and I'm actually so happy because if you look at what the Democratic Alliance has been doing and saying and policies that they said they would never support that they're now supporting, I truly believe that I probably would have resigned from the Democratic Alliance based on principle because I've never chased these positions for money. I do have successful businesses. I don't do this for, the salary or the perks of being a member of parliament. So ultimately, maybe it was a blessing in disguise.
Well, you said before, I don't see how I can defend the Democratic Alliance today based on what they've become.
Yeah.
So that certainly holds true.
Yeah.
We're running out of time, but I just want to end on a more general point based on everything we've discussed today and perhaps the more topical issues of gender-based violence and, although of course that's an evergreen issue too, but specifically being spoken about right now and the G20 coming up. What do you see unfolding in the next few months in South Africa? And what are some of the key takeaways for people at home listening, either in a different country, lessons they can learn, and direct action points for South Africans?
So I believe that the G20 is where the government is trying to portray South Africa as something that it truly isn't. And that is exemplified by the fact that 100% legit banner that was put up legally was ripped off within a couple of hours because they don't want to talk about the dirty secrets. So I think the G20 is for South Africa, specifically for the ANC government, to try and get some credibility back. I don't really think that they care about changing anything because Cyril Ramaphosa himself said that he's willing to step down after the G20 as the president. But then the question is, who's going to replace him? Because everybody that is currently maybe in line to take over from him has got a rap sheet of alleged corruption or is involved in current cases of investigations of corruption. So the ANC is not going to get better. The ANC is only going to get worse. So I think this is a large-ditched effort for them to get some funding, perhaps from these countries, to try and fix some of the things that they have wasted on corruption, money that they've stolen.
Do you think they will get any funding?
I hope not, but there unfortunately are people that are very loyal to South Africa, and they'll probably commit, some form of compensation or money that they'll give South Africa.
What would that look like?
I believe it'll be potential investments like talking about agriculture and the things that South Africa needs some assistance on, especially with electricity. Finally, we've had 1 year without load shedding, but I'm too scared to think of how much money we spent on diesel, because those are always the things that they keep aside. Hey, we kept the lights on, but it cost you 4 times as much, or cost the government 4 times as much. Something that I would like to tell people is that the ANC has been in charge of this country for the last 31 years. On average, if you look at how much money they've received from taxpayers and money to spend back on people, it's 33 trillion rand. The question I have is, if you look at the state, we are in the Western Cape, which is run better than any other province. If you look at the state of the Eastern Cape, Gauteng, the Free State, KZN, can you say that 33 trillion rand has been spent? No. Unequivocally no. Because the infrastructure is worse now than what it was during apartheid. service delivery is worse now than what it was during apartheid. And the reason I'm giving you the example is not to say, hey, apartheid was good. I'm saying apartheid was atrocious, specifically for the vast majority of black people. But yet black people still find themselves in terrible conditions.
This is the big thing.
Exactly. So they don't have access to drinking water. They still have to take a shit. I'm sorry, but I have to say it because that's actually how crude it is. They have to take a shit in a pit toilet. So where is this money? Where are the hospitals out of this 33 trillion rand? Where are the schools? Where are the power stations? Where is what a government should have built to accommodate both for population growth, but also to make their citizens, take them out of poverty and give them a middle class or a better life? There's none of that. So the G20 or the G16, I believe. Let's call it the G16. I think it's for the ANC is trying to save face, and especially with the United States and Donald Trump coming so hard and exposing what's actually... Look, Donald Trump has said some stupid stuff that isn't factually correct. There isn't a white genocide taking place in South Africa. But if you look at Gregory Stanton's stages of genocide, we're already fulfilling 8 out of the 10. And he is an individual that has looked at a lot of genocides and has looked at the patterns. So there isn't a white genocide. But remember, a genocide doesn't just happen. There are steps that eventually lead to it. And I can definitely tell you that if politicians sing openly about the killing of people, I think people should take note around the world. So the G20, the ANC to save face. Hopefully they don't get a lot of money because that money is just going to go into the pockets of cadres. And broad-based black economic empowerment will benefit from that, which once again, it's a small elite group of people that benefit whilst the vast majority of people still live in the poor conditions that they live. So that is very important. And I would ask the audience to also just go and check out the 145 race-based laws in this country. And it's very easy. There's a website. You can go to racelaw.co.za. Now, there is one that says race laws with an S, and that's already a paid-for propaganda website to say that whatever you just saw on the other website is a blatant lie. So go to both websites and check out.
Thank you so much for your time, Renaldo. There's so much to discuss, and I always feel like I'm coming in short, even with Ernst as well. We ran for 2 hours, and there just wasn't enough time because this is all so complex.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry to try and fit so much into this conversation.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for the questions. I really do appreciate it. And anything that just puts a spotlight on South Africa to, for people to do the research. I think most South Africans are happy, black, white, colored, Indian, that is against the African National Congress and against this government, is happy that a spotlight is being shone on South Africa. And if people that's watching this are interested in South Africa, I beg you to go and fact check everything that I've said. And if you find one thing wrong, call me out, by all means. But that's one thing that the government won't do. The government and mainstream media won't hold themselves to the same standard as what people hold, alternative media individuals. So fact check me. I beg you to do that. And then go and check out the race laws. And then the government itself said that there are no race laws in this country when we've got broad-based black economic empowerment and other 144 race-based laws. That tells you that the government is lying, not the alternative media.
Where can people find more of your work?
You can find me on YouTube, Renaldo Gouws. I've got 200,000 followers there. I talk every day about what's happening in South Africa. Then the same with TikTok, the same with Facebook, and X, which is my favorite hangout place because it's just absolute shit that goes on there, and I'm there for it. I love it.
I hate it. I stay off of it. Renaldo, thank you so much. Make sure to subscribe, leave a 5-star rating on Spotify and all the audio platforms, and we'll see you in the next episode.